yellow in real life, I should say. I was talking to Orlando about that.
Okay, excellent. That's a great way to start this podcast. So for
Oh, we're
everybody,
live.
no, we're starting that way. No, that's the way
Let's
we
do it.
start.
Yeah,
This is
go for
real.
it.
There's no editing here at the Autumn Marcus podcast. So for those of you watching, please note that Adam does not look this yellow in real life. Although you don't really look that yellow. But it is the last week of your Broadway show, so you got to be kind of tired, man. Right?
I'm a little fried, but actually, as of about 40 minutes ago, I got some great news. We're extending for another week. So,
oh hell yeah, excellent.
Yeah, we're going till August 13th now. We were trying to extend. They had another renter in the space, but they dropped out, so we scooped that up. So you're the first to know.
Oh, beautiful, man. Beautiful. Well, let everybody know what this show is all about. A psychedelic off-Broadway spectacular one-man extravaganza.
With song and dance. No song and no dance. Actually, there is one scene where I do a little dancing, but not in the traditional Broadway sense. It's recounting a particular
no jazz hands? What do you mean?
No jazz hands. No jazz hands. We'll save that for the full Broadway version. Right now, we're just off Broadway.
Yeah.
So. No, the show, it's called The Mushroom Cure. It's a completely true story. And the sort of capsule version of it is I had very debilitating obsessive compulsive disorder for more than a decade. I had tried everything. I had been on over a dozen different prescription medications, SSRIs, benzos, atypical antipsychotics, everything. Seen all sorts of specialists. I had tried a bunch of holistic approaches, and nothing had helped. Which, by the way, and we can talk more about this, is not that unusual for OCD. There's a lot of OCD sufferers out there who just their issues are not adequately addressed with current treatments.
So paint a picture of your life when you were at the peak of OCD.
Yeah. So, my OCD. Just to finish the very capsule version. So then I read a study in the Journal of Clinical Psychiatry that showed that psilocybin actually seemed to have tremendous efficacy with OCD. So I embarked, as I say in my marketing, on a program of vigilante psychopharmacology. I tried to cure myself that way, really out of desperation. And that's what the show is about. Really, the show begins when I read that study, and it sort of chronicles my attempts to try to treat myself. So to answer your question, the OCD for me, the sort of popular conception of OCD is hand washing, contamination fear. That was not what I had. And that's probably the most common strain, but there's many, many sufferers who have different sort of manifestations. For me, it was actually about decision-making, which I thought you'd find particularly interesting because in a sense, I was really trying to optimize everything, which I know is something you find, something that you gravitate towards. But I was going to an extreme degree. So a typical example, it could involve anything. It could involve what shirt to put on. I'd put on a shirt, and as soon as I put it on, I'd think, you know what? No, this isn't the right one. For whatever reason, there was something wrong with it. It wasn't the right shirt for the right occasion.
Right.
And so I'd change it. And as soon as I put on another shirt, I'd say, wait, no, you know what? The first one was the right one. And then put that one back on. And, I could spend an hour doing that. And an hour may not sound like that much. I mean, it is, but then that, you have to multiply that by every trivial decision, what side of the street to walk down, what to eat. I'm a stand-up comic. So what jokes would I do in what comedy club set in what order? And it just completely took over my life. Because, if you think about it, I've heard people say life is about decisions, but really life is decisions. I mean, I believe that we have free will, even though the scientific consensus on that is iffy at best. But my primary experience is that I think I can choose, I can make my own choices. And we're confronted with choices literally every moment. We don't see it that way. We see choices as specific, discrete events. Am I going to eat this or do that or, listen to this or watch that? But actually, every moment we have an infinite number of choices. So when the OCD sort of latched onto that aspect of my existence, I mean, it just, as I say in the show, I became its bitch. It just owned me. I had, it was pretty awful. I really had a very limited life for many, many years as a result of it.
Yeah, I mean, I've always said that choices are inherent superpower. That is the one thing that we as humans have the capability of doing. And you had the kryptonite for that, which is something that was preventing you from being able to execute on those choices in any sort of efficient manner. So yeah, I can only imagine how debilitating that must have felt like. So that's how the show starts. You kind of give a picture of that, and then you read this study, and then let's keep telling the story, man.
Yeah, sure. So, well, I had tried in college. I had tried LSD, mushrooms, and MDMA. They didn't really work.
At the same time?
No, not at the same time. No polytrigging. I wasn't that advanced, at least back then. I did get into that in these experiences a little bit, with mixed effects, to put it mildly. But yeah, not something I would dabble in again. But no, I tried psychedelics. They didn't work for me. Now I know the reason they didn't work is because I was on heavy doses of SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, which for many people block the effects of psychedelics. So mushrooms worked a little bit. I had a mild trip. LSD and MDMA had no effect on me, other than some sort of mild stimulation, but no psychedelic effects. So it wasn't like I was experienced with this stuff. But I read this study, and it really was just a case of abject desperation. Nothing had worked. I was really losing all hope. And so I read this study, and so I figured, what do I have to lose? I actually had a lot of difficulty finding mushrooms. For whatever reason, at that time in New York, it seemed like there was a bit of a mushroom drought. So I asked a lot of people. I couldn't find mushrooms. Then, purely coincidentally, or, divine intervention, whatever your worldview is, random chance, some sort of intention, who knows, manifestation. I met, while doing comedy, I met a woman, we started dating, and I later learned she had sort of unintentionally cured herself of clinical depression with psychedelic cacti, with San Pedro, DCI, that sort of thing. And which was a staggering coincidence to me that I had met this person, again, seemingly randomly, who had basically the exact experience I was looking for. And so we together, and she also happened to be a psychologist. So I sort of became her unofficial research subject, as it were.
Cool.
And went down sort of the cactus rabbit hole. And then eventually that didn't really work for me. I figured out at that point that it was probably the SSRIs. I got off of those.
Yeah, because San Pedro or Wachuma is serotonergic. So it's going to have a similar dud effect as MDMA, I suppose, when you're on an SSRI, because it's blocking the serotonin reuptake. Exactly. So it's the whole, So eventually I got off the SSRIs. And then I also discovered the strange and wonderful world of research chemicals, Alexander Shulk and all that stuff. And so I got and tried a lot of those. And without sort of giving away the end of the show, at a certain point, I think my obsessive nature sort of co-opted this whole quest to cure myself, where I was looking for a silver bullet. I was looking for something that would take away the OCD, solve all my problems, save me, connect me to something beyond myself. And I went for it very aggressively. And of course, as I've heard you talk about some of your psychedelic experiences. When you go at it that way, it usually doesn't end well. I was trying to control an experience that inherently, I think the beauty of the psychedelic experience is actually letting go of control. Yeah, it's surrender. You have to approach it the opposite way that you would approach any problem in life, which is overcome the problem with the sheer ferocity of your intent and will and drive. And in the psychedelic experience, it's how much can you release? How much control can you surrender? How much can you let go? It's really the opposite side of the coin.
Yes, you put it better than I could have myself. And it took me a long time to realize that. So I was doing the exact opposite. I mean, to me, OCD is really a dysfunction of control, or of an erroneous idea of what you can control and how much. The idea is it's almost magical thinking. It's like, if I can just, if my hands are perfectly clean, and again, I didn't have that form, but if I make the perfect decision, well, then everything in my life will be perfect. But of course, that's not true. I could choose the perfect shirt, and that has very little bearing on my absolute existence, because so much of our existence is seemingly beyond our control, and certainly beyond our direct control. You can't sort of brute force, most things. So, the cliche would be, I could put on the perfect shirt, but if I walk out the door and get hit by a bus, well, it doesn't really matter. So OCD is sort of trying to control everything to the umpteenth degree. And of course, when you try to do that, your life just spirals completely out of control. And so I applied that same mindset to psychedelics, and I had some pretty harrowing experiences. I was humbled in a brutal, though ultimately I would say very compassionate way in the long term, because it was what I needed. I needed to see the limits of my control, and I also needed to have the experience of surrendering and expecting everything to be horrible, expecting to be engulfed by, on certain psychedelic experiences, and actually realizing when I surrendered that this terrifying lack of control that I was trying to avoid, it actually turned into, you can't really put it into words, but if I had to, I would say love, connection. Those are the two words that come to mind.
Yeah, it's sort of a trust in the universe, which is in its way a certain form of love of this existence, love of this life. It's faith to a certain degree.
Yes.
That it's just taking that trust fall and realizing that it's going to be all right no matter what. Which in itself is a form of love for this grand experiment, this great game that we're playing. So it makes sense to me.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a perfect way of putting it. And that's ultimately what was transformative for me is again, I don't want to give away the end of the show, but having these experiences where the illusion of control, maybe the best way to put it, the illusion of control that I'd clung so desperately to, the idea that I could engineer this perfect existence if I could just make the perfect choice and everything would be exactly the way I wanted it to be. That illusion was ripped away from me, completely and totally, on mushrooms, and on a few other chemicals. 2CE was also and I would say 5-MeO-DMT was pretty instrumental. That was, wow. Talk about not being able to put something into words, but.
Yeah, there's probably one of the only psychedelic experiences I've had where, one of my gifts is that during a psychedelic experience, including incredibly intense ones like iboga, which usually a lot of people can't fully, like Graham Hancock describes in his book Supernatural, you can't fully remember everything that happens in that trip because it's so intense. I'm able to leave like a recorder on in my thoughts and be able to record what's happening and then recount that. The only exception to that is this compound called Vilca, which is old Chavin recipe, 3,000-year-old recipe that's a combination of largely 5-MeO-DMT, NN-DMT, and bufotenine, and you snort it, and you snuff it up your nose, and you snort enough of it until it feels like 2 railroad spikes being hammered up each nostril. That's how you know you got enough. And then you go to your room for 10 minutes, and for 20 minutes, at a certain point, I was so far from this world. I made a conscious choice. I was like, listen, I'm going into territory where the recorder isn't going to work. It's like going into the nebula in Star Trek or something, like all recording devices are going to be turned off. I'm going to have absolutely no recollection of what happens for the next 10 minutes. And that was a really interesting experience for me because obviously right now I don't know exactly what happened in that point because I can't recall it. It was too deep. I remember going into it and I remember coming out of it. But I don't remember this 10-minute span in the middle because it was just too far. So, 5-MeO is a powerful tool, no doubt.
Yeah, well, that's exactly it. I think at a certain point with some of these experiences, because I think like you, I tend to be I like observing. I love experience. And that was part of the attraction of this too. As I got more deep into the sort of psychedelic world, is just having these incredibly novel experiences that ultimately defy words because they're not intellectual experiences. They can have that component certainly, but and I think that's also why, just drawing this connection now, why they were so invaluable in teaching me surrender. Mm-hmm. Because surrender, I'd been exposed to the concept of acceptance, a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy for OCD, and indeed most mental illnesses. I'll put that in quotes, and that's a whole digression, but not to say that pathological suffering doesn't exist. I just don't believe in discrete categories. Oh, you're sick, you're well. Right. I think a lot of that serves the pharmaceutical industry.
We're all sick to a certain degree, and we're all well to a certain degree.
Exactly. We all have addictions, which I would define as ways that we develop, often unconsciously, to avoid pain, but that ultimately create more pain for ourselves and crucially for others. Yeah. And I still have them. I'm sure I have many that I'm unaware of, but But the surrender thing, I was taught that in cognitive behavioral therapy, the idea of, hey, don't try to get rid of these thoughts and urges by thinking about them or engaging in rituals. Accept the thoughts and urges, because once you accept them, you've robbed them a lot of their power. It may feel unpleasant to have this strong urge to change your shirt or to reverse a decision, but if you give into that urge and engage in the, ritual behavior of reversing, it's not going to get rid of the urge. It's just going to make it stronger. So I understood that intellectually, but it was just an intellectual concept of acceptance. And it was under psychedelics for the first time that I was able to viscerally experience that letting go, that you really can't put into words. You call it, it's a leap of faith. It's so yeah, the verbal part of psychedelics. I mean, obviously in my show, I recount my certain trips. I don't have room for all of them, and I try to put them into words as best I can. But ultimately, I think, I think every experience, words are inadequate. Words are not the same as experience.
You're trying to describe the ineffable with concrete symbols. It's not. It's inherently impossible.
And I would say all of
it. Get as close as you can.
Yeah, exactly. And it's all ineffable at some level. Yeah. So I think, but particularly with these intense experiences, you have to leave words behind.
It's interesting because you had enough of a certain pattern of behavior that would be clinically diagnosed as a condition, OCD. But all of us have a bit of that to a certain degree,
Yes.
And I think by looking at examples of the extreme, it can help us all recognize when we have the beginning stages of those patterns, because all of that type of thinking is pretty unhelpful to our human optimization as if you look at it that way. But sometimes it takes an extreme example to recognize when we're doing that in our own life and how we can have more acceptance and surrender and realize that there are a million paths, and all we can do is choose a path with heart and go from there. There's always that, oh, maybe I should have gone to a different party. Maybe I should have ordered this different meal. Maybe I should have done this different thing. And we can second guess all our choices and spend our whole life out of the present moment, which is inherently less pleasurable and less enjoyable. Or we can accept that this is the choice we made and lock into that presence and have a much fuller and richer experience from enjoying whatever choice that we made. And I think that's really one of the things that the crazy philosopher Carlos Castaneda tries to impart as well, is that there's all of these choices, and all you can do is choose a path with heart and then let everything go, because otherwise you're going to never be enjoying anything at all, so really recognizing that and seeing extreme, but realizing that we all have it to a certain degree.
Absolutely. And I think it's probably more prevalent now. I mean, if you look at it from a sort of evolutionary biology perspective, it makes sense to obsess over choices when the choices are, should I go hunting in that cave where there could be a bear that will kill me, or there could be prey, or should I go hunting in that cave? Should I camp here where maybe a lion might attack, or should I camp there? Every choice, in our not so distant past really was, or maybe not every choice, but most choices were potentially life or death. And it certainly makes more sense from an evolutionary perspective to pay attention to, I think it's called negativity bias, to pay attention to potential threats rather than potential rewards, because, if you get eaten by a lion, that's much worse than, say, finding extra food or extra mating opportunities is good. So it makes sense that we evolved to place so much weight on choices.
I don't know. There's certainly a trade-off. It depends on the mating opportunities. It depends on the lion. Definitely. You put a lot of people in that situation.
Absolutely.
The lion.
And we do that too. I mean, if you look at even extreme sports, people risk. I mean, I think you can trace a lot of what people do and even myself as a performer. It's not like it wasn't a conscious choice of, oh yeah, I'm going to start doing stand-up to get girls. But sure, that was there somewhere. It wasn't totally in the back of my mind. Yeah.
If you're saying it's not a factor, you show me someone who's saying that's not a factor, I'm going to show you a liar.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think it's always a factor. Sorry, I'm just closing something because my computer is a little slow. Whatever, we'll deal with that later. But I think today now there are so many choices that really aren't life or death. And that even with technology, I'm sure I'm not the first person to have said this, those choices are just proliferating exponentially. On my phone, I have 7 million possible decisions. I can download an innumerable number of apps. That was an oxymoron, an innumerable number, but I can download almost an infinite number of apps. I can do almost an infinite number of things with those apps. I can connect to people in all sorts of different ways. So there are so many choices that ultimately are not life or death. But I don't think we evolved with the evolutionary equipment, at least not innately, to say, oh, this isn't an important choice, I'm not going to worry about it, at least a little bit.
Yeah.
So, and also,
it's interesting to me, the dichotomy that we're presented between mind and self, and that's obviously something that became super apparent to you because you had a function, basically a software program running in your mind that yourself dramatically wanted to get to change, right? Like yourself wanted the mind to stop being obsessive compulsive about these things, didn't recognize that self was mind was self, because that's not just you, that's almost everybody, it's myself as well. There's this aspect of our brains that we can't seemingly control. And then I think a lot of the work that I've done is to try and regain that unification and that kind of reconciliation between self and mind, because that's ultimately, the ideal scenario where you can truly choose your thoughts. You can choose your way into the emotional state you want. You can choose your way into presence. You can choose your way out of these death spirals of insecurity and fears that are unwarranted and things like that, because your mind and yourself are somewhat unified. And I just wonder if that's a product of, something that's happened more culturally and technologically, or if that was just kind of the natural cost of awareness, that, kind of eating the fruit of knowledge in the Garden of Eden kind of metaphor. But it's certainly something that, I think is a really important bridge to make, and really to reconcile mind and self and try to get those at least as close to the same oneness as possible.
Yes, I think it's there is that sort of divorce. And I wonder also how much of this comes down to the fact that my view of psychedelics is I think we co-evolved with this stuff not coincidentally.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I don't think it's coincidental that there are these plants and now synthetics, though the discovery of LSD seems pretty damn coincidental, or not, but highly unlikely, but particularly plants that have been used for thousands and more than thousands of years that happen to interact with the human nervous system in a very specific way to produce very specific effects that are generally not attainable otherwise. Deep meditative states, stuff like that, you can to some extent, but these pretty unique states that seem to have incredible value for really, in my view, for what you're talking about, which is sort of, I don't want to say unification of self, you could say, self-awareness. And certainly it seems like that real divorce is relatively recent. It looks like, most ancient cultures, even Western cultures, had some sort of tradition. I'm not well versed on this, but I know there's some evidence that, major religious traditions, including Christianity, had some grounding in mystical experience potentiated by what we would call psychedelics, whatever those substances were. And that now that certainly mainstream society has become very divorced from that, I wonder how much of what we would call sort of the sickness of society and the individuals in that society is because, we didn't evolve to, in my view, to exist separately from this stuff. I've always thought it's funny. I had a joke about this in stand-up. If you believe in God, you can't really be against drugs. You can't say, oh yeah, God engineered everything exactly according to his plan, but oh yeah, these plants that happen to have a very specific effect, oh, he didn't intend that. He just overlooked that one. He wasn't, he wasn't on point that day.
Right. Yeah, he made a mistake.
Right, exactly. Everything else is divine plan, but that he dropped the ball there.
Especially because, as you were saying, the plant medicines and the brain, it's like a lock and key. We have these tryptamine receptors with this inherent latent ability, and then you add these things like psilocybin and DMT, and it locks into these tryptamine receptors largely. There's other mechanisms of action for different things, and it produces this reliable effect that in clinical studies like the one in Johns Hopkins produces a top life experience, top 5, or in many cases the single impactful best life experience that you could have. That seems a little too much to be a complete accident that lock and key would work in exactly that fashion. And then, of course, you have Terence McKenna's stone nuke theory, and a lot of the cave paintings that were shown in like Werner Herzog's Cave of Forgotten Dreams, and Graham Hancock did a lot of work on that. So there's certainly a lot of evidence of psychedelics kind of riding shotgun with humanity for quite a while. And I think they're probably the most important tool to bring us back into a certain alignment and a certain consciousness. And I think it's happening. I think either through medical or religious exemptions, pretty soon here, within the next decade, I think all of the major psychedelics are going to be legal. Iboga will be legal, medical ground, psilocybin medical, MDMA medical, marijuana medical, and then probably San Pedro and ayahuasca will come through on the religious side, maybe eventually medical, but probably religious, because it'll be difficult to standardize those brews. But it's all coming. All of the allies are returning to save humanity to a certain degree in their 11th hour. And obviously not all of humanity needs to be saved, but I think a shift of consciousness needs to happen to create a large course correction, like a giant cruise ship that's heading towards a melting iceberg. We need to turn the ship, and I think all these allies are coming just at the right time.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And actually, at the end of the show every night, I give a little speech that's quite similar to what you just said, because I'm donating all the profits of the show to MAPS, Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. And some people have said to me, is that really the most important cause out there? What about world hunger? What about war, violence, all that? But the way I look at it, well, twofold. First of all, that study that I read that inspired my whole quest, that ultimately transformed my life so dramatically, was funded by MAPS, also Hefter. But two, yes, there are more immediately dire challenges facing humanity right now, no question. But I don't think those are challenges like, let's say, world hunger. A lot of really smart people have worked really hard on that for a long time. There's been incremental progress, but it's still in the billions of people who are malnourished. I mean, so I feel like these, I don't want to say larger problems, but maybe more seemingly urgent problems, I don't think we're going to solve them without a fundamental shift in consciousness. In fact, I'll go a step further. Yeah, and say the reason they've probably arisen and have become so entrenched and so widespread is because there is that lack of consciousness that's taken hold in mainstream society, and has, over well, now we're talking about centuries. So I feel like, yeah, the best chance for world peace, I'm not even saying this facetiously, if every world leader, took a strong dose of mushrooms or LSD or ayahuasca, ideally together, I think that's our best shot. I mean, keep the nuclear buttons.
Well, there's an archaeological case example of that, and it's the culture of Chavin.
I've heard you talk about that. Yeah,
for 800 years or so, there was a culture that thrived in South America, and they would offer wachuma, which is a serotonergic feels very heart opening, a very kind of love inspiring medicine that they would offer to all pilgrims who came by, all leaders, all people, anybody who wanted it, could get wachuma delivered at the capital of Chavin. And there is no evidence of war for that entire period that Chavin was thriving. Now, eventually a peoples came in, and for whatever happened, that civilization, went under after 800 years. You don't know exactly why, but it's one of the unique periods in human history, which is full of conflict in every corner that you look. And in this one little area, for 800 years, there was 100% peace. And it's because, these plants are, agents of consciousness. And I think allowing people to see other people as themselves living a different life, it really robs you of the satisfaction of war and rape and pillage and hoarding different goods and not providing them for others. So, my life, I'm 100% dedicated to the upstream issues of consciousness, because I fully believe that is how change will happen. There's plenty of wealth in the world to fix a lot of these problems if applied with the right minds and in the right ways. But people don't love people enough in order to share that. And you have someone like Bernie Sanders who wants to tax that money away, but it'll never work. You can't forcibly take money from people and expect it to to change the world in a really dramatic way. People are smart, they're savvy, they're going to hide the money, they're going to move it around, they're going to avoid that, and then the government is going to waste it. Really how you get that money from the uber wealthy is you change the consciousness of the uber wealthy. You bring them in and show them a different way, and allow them to want to give to their fellow man, because they recognize all people, rich or poor, as themselves. And that's the way it's going to happen. Anything else, donating money on the downstream side for, sandwiches or bags of rice, it's good and it's compassionate work, but it's really bailing out the Titanic with a champagne glass. There's no way that you're going to solve the problem unless you mend the hull of the ship, and the hull of the ship is consciousness. It's love. It's getting the trauma, out of people and allowing them to remove the delusion that's clouding their eyes and clouding their hearts.
Well, yeah, that to me is one of the great fruits of the psychedelic experience is empathy. And you put it perfectly, seeing, the distinction between self and other evaporates, and as well as the realization of what I'd call sort of, ultimate subjectivity. You realize that your point of view is one of an infinite point of views. You don't have a lock on truth. And from that comes more respect for other people. How can you, I was actually writing a post about this right before we got on. I'll publish it shortly, probably on Facebook, but, saying how everyone in ICE should take mushrooms, because I think the effect that psychedelics reliably produce is, well, uncertainty. You realize that you don't really know what's going on, but also a sense that something is going on, but something that is beyond certainly intellectual understanding. And that ultimately, how can, you can't kill someone unless if you feel that you are absolutely right and they're absolutely wrong at some level. Yeah. And I think psychedelics robs you of that seemingly comforting, but ultimately incredibly destructive delusion.
Yeah, and there is a caveat to that, especially with mushrooms. If you look at the history of the Aztecs, there's very good evidence that Moctezuma and all of his priests were high as shit on psilocybin and cutting hearts out and feeding them to Huitzilopochtli, the hummingbird god. So there is a certain element of, mushrooms in particular will still allow you the sanctity of choice. And if you direct your intent towards the dark energies of the world, which is the energy to kill and conquer, and the mushrooms will ride. That's the way we're playing. Because in my view, and going deep with the mushrooms, you understand that the world is designed with balance, and the dark and the light are both equally important forces, because that's what truly allows free will. If everybody could become enlightened just with an instant thought, then the game wouldn't be fun. What kind of video game do you keep playing and go back to over and over again that doesn't have monsters? You're in a first person shooter, but there's nobody to shoot. It's like nobody wants to play that game. So the world is set up so that there is this balance and that both sides feel good. And one thing in particular that mushrooms will allow you to do is, if your intent is generally for medicine, to feel good and to, see things in the universe and to, figure shit out, then it'll show you that. But if your intent is to fuck some people up, mushrooms very likely will go along with that. Now, I think there's other medicines that can kind of tilt the scales a little bit more. And I think that's where MDMA is a particularly elegant tool, in that it's very difficult to turn MDMA away from an empathic kind of state of heightened love. It has, because of the effect of serotonin itself, I think that would be, if I'm dosing ISIS, for example, that's for sure my choice.
That's your first choice.
For sure my choice, because if you're going to roll the dice, I'd certainly roll the dice with mushrooms, because it's just going to change some of them, but a few of them are going to turn into Moctezumas and just be in a head cutting frenzy. You know what I mean? So it's interesting, these different medicines, and I just certainly wanted to bring that up because nothing's a panacea, for sure.
Yes, and that was what I was looking for in my own quest, was a panacea, and I think what I got was ultimately more valuable than that.
Yeah. So, do you have a short section of the show that you could like a 2-minute little part that you could perform here for us? Give us a little a little preview bit.
That's all right. Let me think about this. What would be a good? what would be a good starting point? Well, why don't I'll just do like 30 seconds from the beginning of the show.
Yeah.
I'm
Cool.
I'm not quite in my thespianic groove, but but here we go. So, all right, let me get into this. Yeah, so there's the iPod, and there's something called the iRiver. They're both sitting on my desk. They're both playing the same song on repeat. I have my headphones on, and I'm switching the plug from one player to the other, back and forth, and back and forth. And I cue up different songs in different genres, different instruments, different vocal ranges, and back and forth, and back and forth. And after 2 days, it's clear. It's clear. I mean, the iRiver sounds better. Overall, like the iPod, it does have a hair more nuance in the mid-range, but the iRiver, it has this sort of richness to it. You know, it's more full-bodied. So good. You're keeping the iRiver. This is done. Just return the iPod right now. And so I'm slipping the iPod back into its box to return it. And the box itself, I can't help but notice that it's hinged, you know? It's my hand. It's hinged, kind of like a jewel box, which is actually fitting, because when the iPod, with those curved chrome edges melding seamlessly into that minimalist white face, it's beautiful, sensual even. Like, I kind of want to lick it. Whereas the iRiver, of course, no one knows what an iRiver looks like. Where to begin? Well, it's made in Korea. I assume South Korea. But maybe it's North, because this thing, it looks communist. It's this stout utilitarian slab studded with switches and dials and knobs and buttons. And people get mugged for their iPods. No one will mug you for an iRiver. If they tried, you just bludgeon them with the thing. But this thing's going to be tucked away in my pocket 90% of the time. The aesthetics are relevant. Yeah, but the iPod's battery's better. I mean, who cares how good the iRiver sounds if you can't even turn the thing on? But there's probably a reason people don't line up for 2 days outside the iRiver store. And so on and so forth.
Yeah, that was awesome, man.
You were a great one-person audience, Aubrey, I have to say, because if I'm doing this for just one person and they're not feeling it.
That's awesome, man. That was really, really, really good. We're gonna try and release this as soon as possible to give people time, if they're in New York, to catch the show. Especially since you just released another week. That's awesome. So, what's the show called? Where can people get tickets?
Yes, Let me give you the info. So the show is called The Mushroom Cure. The easiest thing to remember is if you just go to themushroomcure.com, TheMushroomCure.com, all one word. That's linked to tickets. The show is playing at Cherry Lane Theater in the West Village of New York, and we're there almost every night until through August 13th, Saturday, August 13th. And then hopefully it'll have continued life in New York, and hopefully we'll bring it around to other cities as well.
Yeah, bring it to Austin, man.
I would love to. I have a good friend there, and he's been talking about bringing it there. He's seen the show a bunch, and he thinks it would find a receptive audience there. So yeah, you and I should talk. I would love to.
If you come to Austin, we'll make sure to help you out there. We got obviously a lot of sympathetic people out here.
I am down, and it's a lightweight show. It's just me and a chair, so do it anywhere.
Perfect. Well, that's awesome, man. It's been great having this chat with you.
Likewise.
I look forward to keeping in touch, and I really look forward to seeing the show. As well. What's your other social media platforms and everything that people can reach
so I should clarify. So I am a stand-up comic. This show, as you just saw, it's not really stand-up comedy. It's me telling this completely true story. But my other work, easiest way to access that is just adamstrauss.com, ADAMSTRAUSS.com. Twitter is Atom Strauss, ATOMSTRAUSS. The comic mask, that sort of thing, just because someone else had Adam. Same for Instagram, though I'm not too active there. And then there's a Facebook page for The Mushroom Cure that you can find by searching. And yeah, I'm eager to share this story with as many people as possible, because it seems to touch people. I love doing stand-up. I love making people laugh. And hopefully with this show, I mean, not hopefully, they do laugh too, but also what I really value about doing it is there's tears too. People cry during the show and after the show. And I want, it connects at a deep level, hopefully, for at least some people. So I'm grateful that I get to share this story, and I'm grateful to share a little bit of the story with you. And yeah, if you're in New York, please come on down.
No doubt, my friend. No doubt. Well, that was awesome.
Yeah.
Like I said, everybody, check them out, and we'll certainly be in touch.
Thanks so much, Aubrey. I'll talk to you later.
All right. Take care, Adam. Bye-bye.
Bye.